Okay, good evening everybody. I think everybody has made it in, so great to see you all. Welcome to tonight's webinar. First of all, hope you're all safe and well. We're here tonight to talk about the youth and schools competitive season structure for next season. I think across our clubs and schools, ears and eyes are starting to turn towards what next season is going to look like. So we're delighted to be able to take this opportunity tonight to share some proposals and some plans around competitive structure for next season. If we cast our minds back to March 2020, we Scottish Rugby shared what the conference makeup and structure would be like for next season. Obviously, with the current pandemic in the way that it is, and the restrictions and challenges that we have in place, we have had to look at that and revise what it looks like for next year. So I'd like to take this opportunity tonight to share some headline proposals of that. So if you just bear with me 2 seconds, I'll just progress on to the next couple of slides. Okay, so tonight's webinar, just giving a bit of a summary of what it's about, and I'll just touch on a bit more detail on the agenda. First and foremost, as ever, we've been doing a number of webinars over the last couple of months, particularly on return to rugby and the Scottish Rugby Roadmap. As ever with these webinars, we will be recording it, so it's recording at the moment, so that recording will be available following this webinar, and we will also send out the slides. I appreciate sometimes with these types of information sharing webinars, it's quite difficult to digest everything as I go through the slides. I will obviously take my time and try and make it nice and concise, but to allow you to digest it further, we will send out the slides following this webinar as well, so you can look at it in a wee bit more detail. We do also have a Q&A function, which again we've been utilising and has been working quite well in previous webinars that we've been doing. So it is mainly just myself here tonight. And there's quite a large number also dialed in and tuned into this webinar. So we won't be doing a live Q&A as we progress through in terms of verbal, but there is that opportunity for you to write in questions in the little chat function that's at the bottom of your screen. And what we'll do, we'll follow up with that. We'll maybe answer some of those questions directly following this webinar over the next week or so. We will also produce an FAQs for common questions that are coming up as well, and we'll be able to share these with the attendees for tonight, just to enable that as well. So in terms of panelists, there's obviously myself. For those who don't know me, my name's Steve Turnbull. I'm the Regional Director for Caledonian Midlands, and I've also I take a bit of a lead on the youth and school game, and in particular been leading this work around the competitive structure for next season. We have had a wee bit of a technical glitch. Vicky Cox and Rudy Urbeck were due to be panellists as well, but at my end there's a bit of a technical glitch, so I'm afraid you're stuck with me for this evening. So I hope that's okay. In terms of the agenda, so we're just going to touch on the return to rugby, which you'll all be very familiar with now in terms of where we're at and what it looks like in terms of a roadmap. But just to put that into context for the season ahead and what it could look like, we'll just touch on that slightly as well. We'll then move on to some key considerations and principles for restarting youth rugby. We are clearly in a very unique situation at the moment. There are currently challenges that we have to deal with going forward. There will be some challenges that we have to consider and that we have considered when we're looking at what that structure can be for next season. So we'll just touch on some of those considerations and some of those challenges that we've been making. As well as that, we've just aligned some key principles that we are attaching to the restarting of youth rugby, which is really just helping us inform the decisions that we're making and almost keeping us in check with the decisions that we're making. So we'll just touch on that for the first part of the webinar. We'll then go into the main part, which will probably take most time on, where I'll just share what the proposed competition and play structure for next season looks like, taking into consideration the following 2 points. And then lastly, we'll just cover off some next steps and some key timelines that we will look at within that as well. So just moving forward on the return to rugby. Now, as I said, I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with Scottish Rugby's return to rugby roadmap. We've held a number of webinars over the last couple of months for each phase and stage transition. We've held webinars for with much more information that clubs and schools have been digesting. We are in stage 3 at the moment of this Scottish Rugby return to rugby roadmap, which is aligned with the Scottish Government phase 3. And as you can see, stage 4, 5 and 6 aligns with phase 4 of the Scottish Government route map. And each stage has got some key triggers which allows us to progress and transition. The real purpose for sharing this tonight is not to go into any detail of the roadmap. It's really just to draw our attention to the last stage, which is stage 6. And at the moment, stage 6 is return to competitive rugby. And at the moment, the earliest indicative date for that is October. So what that's allowed us to do, so this has been signed off and approved by Scottish Government at the moment. And what that's allowed us to do is have a bit of a marker in the sand to prepare and plan a season structure from October onwards. And that's what we're going to share tonight, is what that season structure from October onwards looks like. I think what's really, really important to stress here is that we are absolutely informed and guided by Scottish Government. So these are indicative dates. We need to be real and live to the situation that things in terms of the dates might change slightly. And what does that mean for our competition structure? Well, we as Scottish Rugby, in terms of the structure, need to take that into consideration. And I think that, which we'll hopefully show tonight, means that we have to have a structure that might need to be adapted and flexible if things do change and timelines change, and we therefore don't have the same time frame that we were originally setting out to have. And I think for clubs and schools, I think that also just means a bit of being live, a bit of understanding, potentially a wee bit of compromise in some cases, that we're in such a unique scenario, such a unique environment. And our best case scenario is to start in October, and we have what we think is a really good plan and a really good structure to restart youth rugby and keep our young players in the game. But if we do have to shift and change, we just would like to expect a bit of understanding and compromise due to the circumstances that we are in. So there are a couple of key points that I would like to make. And obviously wrapped around that, as we go through the season structure tonight and the proposals and some of the headline detail that we'll talk about, just having in the back of your mind that we will also be working on contingencies for any changes. There will be caveats attached to things for the reasons that I've just talked about. Because we've got to be informed and guided by Scottish Government as we progress. So the roadmap is on the Scottish Rugby website. As I say, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. If you aren't, when we send out these slides, the link is on this slide here. There is this plus a huge amount of guidance and resource that we've produced, which will help at the moment with the stages that we're in just now in your preparation and returning to rugby. So just moving on to some considerations and also some principles for restarting youth rugby. I've kind of talked, I think I've set the scene and talked a bit about what we've had to consider or things that we have to consider to ensure that we get the correct competition structure that ultimately allows your environments, your clubs and your schools the opportunity to restart rugby safely and have environments within your clubs and schools where you can retain your youth players and we get rugby thriving again across the country. To do that, as I said, there's some considerations, and this slide here and some of the detail that I'll go on to will just, I suppose, help paint the picture for the following proposal that I'll make as we go through next wee while. So first and foremost, I've kind of touched on it. I don't think I need to labour it too much more, but the rate that we progress through our roadmap is absolutely determined by Scottish Government. And as I just alluded to a couple of minutes ago, that means that we have to have a structure that might need to be adapted. It needs to have contingencies. It will have caveats in place to ensure that we are returning appropriately and returning at the right times. So I don't think we've ever been in an environment where the start of our season is not determined by us as a sport. And that's just something that we've obviously having to consider, as we are doing with the adult male, the adult women and the girls rugby across all areas of our game. I think it's no great surprise that the sport that we are in has more challenges than some other sports, some of our competing sports, due to the greater levels of close personal contact that's happened within a game of rugby, within training as well. So I think that just lends itself to us having to progress with caution as we go through the stages, and as we also enter into a competitive season and competitive rugby. Again, it's just that understanding that we've got to progress with real caution, again, to ensure that we're doing things at the correct time. A consideration that we've discussed when we've been working through the proposal and season structure, and is just around the return to rugby and the potential that there may be some levels of anxiety about returning to rugby from players and parents. And although this maybe doesn't directly inform how we have developed the structure, I think indirectly it has, in just in terms of when we're thinking about how many games, how congested we're making the season, especially at the start. If we're looking to start rugby in October, November, we've had to think about how congested that first phase is, just to allow a bit more of a bedding in period potentially. And that's just, again, I suppose, just how we have considered that particular scenario or particular challenge within there. I think clubs and schools have a role to play within that as well. And particularly, I know we've got very good sign up of our COVID-19 safety coordinators within our club and schools, who will be directly impacting that as well and doing really good jobs within there. Another consideration that we've been making when we've been thinking about what the structure and the proposal for next season looks like is around travel, and there's a couple of elements within here that's probably pushed us in a certain direction around the structure of the conferences for the youth game for next year. First of all, there is a potential of reintroduction of travel restrictions if there are second waves or second spikes as we progress into that winter phase. So if we need to kind of keep that in mind, and does that lend itself to regionalising things more? I think on top of that, potentially as well as that, there may be increased cost of transport hire. Now again, we don't have the Bible of why and how that would happen, but if, for example, there are restrictions on travel, that may lend itself to increase costs for clubs. So again, we're having to consider that, particularly with the youth game, where a fixture consists of 5 teams travelling. Because of the structure of our conferences, or up to 5 teams travelling, sorry, I should say. Because of the structure of our conferences, it's with whole club, if you whole club, or whole school, if you whole school, we don't just have one team travelling like we do in the adult game. We have up to 5 teams travelling, which again adds some layers of complexity around travel, and potential increased resource of volunteers, parents, and cost. There's growing research, and it's happening down south at the moment. There's a lot of discussion at Scottish Government level around local lockdowns if we are experiencing second waves. or spikes as we progress. We're aware that local authorities are being tasked with having procedures and protocols for local lockdowns. We're already seeing that happening down south in places like Leicester and Greater Manchester. Again, if that was to happen up here, it creates added complications for national conferences, because if we are in a situation where we're locking down local areas, however, we have a national conference, that would ultimately put a restriction around that national conference. If it was regional conferences, we could lock down local areas but still have rugby playing in other areas of the country, which is something that we've been considering. So again, quite a strong consideration within there that's helped inform how we have developed our structure going forward. And then finally, the final consideration, and this is absolutely pertinent to the youth game, is given that the season is going to be pushed on and at the earliest not starting until October period, end of October, beginning of November, we're going to be playing rugby through, potentially playing rugby through exam times. And we as a governing body have to understand that, we have to reflect that. We understand, particularly again with the unique situation that's happening within education, maybe additional stresses and pressure on players and schools within that period. Therefore, again, how does that inform us with our season structure? Well, just about how many fixtures and how much are we congesting the fixture calendar around that period. And we're suggesting that we don't. We have fixtures, we have regular playing opportunities, but we just don't add additional stresses and pressures to the external environments that we're having to deal with as well. And that's something that's been discussed and again considered as we've been developing the proposal as we progress. And then so I mentioned a couple of slides ago that we wanted to develop some key principles that would help inform and almost act as a bit of a sense check to us that when we're progressing with a structure, that we have these principles at the forefront, and we're always revisiting them to ensure that it's keeping us in check. I think first and foremost, this is a principle that's been attached to the conferences since their inception 5 years ago, and it is absolutely within Scottish Rugby, absolutely at the forefront and is paramount. Player welfare will continue to be at the forefront of all we do and the decisions that we're making. I think next season there needs to be a focus on the retention of particularly of our young players within the game. I've kind of talked about some of the challenges that we're experiencing within our environment, and we need to use this as an opportunity to get rugby back, and to get it thriving again, and therefore keeping our players within the game supported by a really good competition structure that incites and engages all of our players across the game. I think there is opportunities to recruit new players to our game as well, and I think that can lend itself to this, but I think for a principle, we need to think about structures that supports the retention of our players. Our competition is age and stage appropriate. Again, a key principle that will always run through what we're doing. We've had such a gap in rugby. We know young players across the country will be eager and chomping at the bit to get back playing. We want to create a structure which runs through our entire game, all of our clubs and all of our schools, which ultimately provides players with regular playing opportunity, regular competitive playing opportunity. So they're getting that enjoyment, and ultimately they're getting that opportunity to do what they love doing. And that's, again, another key theme that we're kind of checking ourselves on. Focus on creating a positive player development environments. And this is maybe more of a challenge back to our clubs and schools. But again, creating those environments that are supporting the retention of players within our game. And I think that's a lot of support that we can provide as a rugby development team, but also as a bit of a challenge back to our clubs and schools about ensuring that we do have a focus on creating positive player development environments across our clubs and schools. And then lastly, it's all you guys that are here tonight. It is absolutely imperative to the sustainability of our game is our volunteer and staff that do support youth rugby across the country. Again, you guys are all absolutely considered when we are thinking about the season structure, and for us it's about removing barriers if we can remove barriers where appropriate, and making things as easy as possible where we can with the season structure, and that's something that's really important to us as Scottish Rugby, because ultimately, without volunteers and staff propping up and supporting our clubs and schools, then we don't have a sustainable game. So those are the 6 key principles that we'll be checking ourselves on as we progress through this next phase. Okay, so I hope you're following so far. Just to remind you again about the Q&A function, we are getting some questions that are coming in. I'm sure this next section of the presentation will prompt some more questions. So I'm sure I'll see that number ticking up. But please do pop in your questions as we go through. We won't do, as I see some people raising their hands, we won't take any questions live as we go through. Those will just happen through. If you can just pop, sorry, if you do want to raise your hand, instead of raising your hand, you can just pop questions into the Q&A chat, and we'll answer them after the webinar over the next couple of days. Okay, so competition and play structure. So first of all, how we've got to this point, I'm just going to, over the next 2 slides, I'm just going to share you some headline sort of bullet points to demonstrate what the structure is going to look like next season. How we've got to this point, so there's been an internal working group which has been led by myself and worked with the colleagues across Scottish Rugby. We've also had 2 sense check groups. So one sense check group for youth rugby, so from our clubs, and then one sense check group from our schools. And those have been groups of about circa 10 individuals who we've met with and just shared some intermediate proposals with, just to have that sense check and ensure that what we're doing is kind of in the right direction. So those have been really, really valuable. So we thank the people that have engaged with us on that, and that has now led us to where we are now and in a position to share this proposal. So first and foremost, I'll go through these hopefully nice and clearly, but I've already touched on it. If Phase 6 is triggered in October, we will then develop or have a youth competitive rugby season for all of our Tier 1 to Tier 4 clubs. That's using the old terminology that we have, but just to make it clear, our Tier 1 to Tier 4 clubs and all of our Tier 1 to Tier 3 schools. And that competitive season would run from the beginning of November through to March. The reason that we're starting in November is that Phase 6 would likely be near the end of October, and we want to finish the season in March before most of our young players are off for Easter break, and also before exam time, post-Easter break as well. So a nice short condensed season running from November through to March. The competitive programme will be consistent for all clubs and schools, and it will form 2 phases. So the first phase will be competitive regional conference fixtures, and that will run from November through to end of January, beginning of February. And that will be a first phase of regional conferences within that. The placings and the outcomes of that first phase will then inform the second phase. And that second phase will be you'll either progress into a national knockout competition, a cup or a shield, or a regional participation or cup programme for that second phase. And that will run for February and March. So we'll have that structure from November all the way through to March. For the first phase, everybody will be playing a regional conference in regional groupings and regional pools. We'll actually use the placings of those conferences to inform whether you progress into a national cup or a regional cup or regional participation programme for that second phase. And I'll show you in an illustration shortly what that looks like. So that means that we're saying there won't be any national conferences next season. All conference rugby will be regional. So that first phase will all be regional. We know that will be a change for some people. We hope that from what I've gone through, you'll understand why we're going down that route, and that's kind of where we're at the moment. For that first phase, all fixtures will maintain conference-style fixturing. So where possible, we will be looking for whole club or whole school versus whole club or whole school. So those 5 fixtures from under 13s up to under 18s, where possible across most of our conferences, we will be wanting to maintain that conference principle, that conference ethos of whole v whole. So for the regions, for the schools conference regions, there will be an East conference or conferences within the East. There will be conferences within the West and Caledonia. So for the schools, there's 3 distinct regions. For the clubs, for the youth conference regions, for the Tier 1 to Tier 3 clubs, there will be a Caledonia North conference, there will be a Caledonia Midlands, there will be West, and then there will be the East, which will be the Borders conference for the clubs. The reason that there's a difference between the schools and the clubs is purely just the number of participants within there, and is getting that balance of creating competitive programs and keeping it regional. So that's the regions for the youth conference for the Tier 1 to Tier 3 clubs. That is clubs that we're going to compete in the Open Conference, Shogun, Lancer or Gallant A for next season. And then for what we would call Tier 4, so that sort of terminology, the youth conferences, the regions would be Caledonia North, Midlands, Glasgow South and Glasgow North as the 4 distinct regions for those conferences. Again, I've got some illustrations to show you what that looks like. We are wanting to, and this came quite strongly through both sense check groups that we had. We're wanting to protect Cup Finals Day, so that second phase that I talked about and having that National Cup competition, we would be hopeful of holding a Cup Finals Day at BT Murrayfield. Again, we obviously have to caveat that with if we can, due to restrictions in place with facilities and with COVID from Scottish Government. But we'll be looking to hold that ideally in March, and we feel like that would provide a really good platform to celebrate youth rugby at the end of this new season that we would be in. And then finally, my last point here, so we already have really well established regional youth cups, club cups, particularly in Caledonia and the West. So that will still be maintained for that second phase of the season, albeit in a revised format, but we will be looking to maintain those the regional youth club cups in the second phase. So those are the headlines. Again, just a reminder, these will be sent out, so you'll be able to look at them in a bit more detail. But hopefully what you can see here is first and foremost there's consistency between our youth and our school programme. Although environments are different, there's the external environments and the external considerations that we've had to make, and the principles are the same. And therefore what we've created there are some headlines that we think will present a really good season. So I appreciate that as bullet points can be quite hard to digest. So just from an illustrative point of view, so as I said, just a reminder, all clubs and schools will follow the same structure of season in terms of how it flows. So the season would start in November and end in March. We would have a Christmas break within there, and that would be 3 to 4 weeks depending on the conference. We know particularly our independent schools have a longer Christmas break, so we would obviously consider that and apply that to that particular conference fixture scheduling, but we would have that enforced Christmas break within there. So that first phase would be regional conferences, as I've talked about. And what that kind of, just a wee bit of headline detail of what that looks like. So first and foremost, I talked a wee bit about not congesting fixture calendars too heavily, particularly at the beginning. So we have taken that into consideration, and within this first period, there will be an absolute maximum number of fixtures that Scottish Rugby will schedule as part of this programme, and that will be 8 conference fixtures within that first period. And we feel like that gives enough of regular competitive rugby without making it every single week for 10 to 12 weeks. So we have the ability to potentially ease ourselves in ever so slightly, if that's the right terminology. And it's not congested, it's not too condensed, and it's not hopefully not putting additional stresses and pressure on our clubs and schools, our coaches within, and our players and our parents. Within those regional conferences, that first phase, I talked about it being a whole club and whole school, so there will be a league table for a whole club. And then the progression into the cups will be for under 16 and under 18. And those will be determined by individual placings of those teams. So what that means, so if Club A are in the Caledonia Midlands Conference, they will have a whole club placing for all 5 of their teams. But then their under 16 team and the under 18 team will be on a separate league table. And if they come in the top 2, they will progress through to the National Cup as those individual team placings. And hopefully that makes sense. So that would then move on to the second phase of the programme, and the first layer of the second phase is the under 16 and under 18 National Cup or Shield. That will be a straight knockout competition. It will be a maximum of 4 rounds, so it'll be a round 1, quarter-final, semi-final, and final. To ensure that we are keep all of our clubs and schools engaged and all of our teams engaged through to the end of March, teams who are knocked out of that stage would and could drop down into the regional programme, which is the second layer of competition that we're looking at. So yes, as I say, that second layer is regional cup and participation programme, and for the clubs that creates a format of regional youth cups, which we're all familiar with in that environment. It could also just be regional reverse conference fixtures, and again we would protect how many fixtures we're playing, particularly as this is over exam time. So maximum of 4 to 6 fixtures that we Scottish Rugby would schedule within that period. So hopefully what that shows you is that one, there's a robust programme in place. It should provide all your players and coaches with a wee bit of clarity, is that one, there's a competitive structure, but also it's going to provide regular playing opportunities, regardless of what level your club or school is at. There will be regular playing opportunities which should be appropriate from November through to March, with a competitive element within there. Okay. So just a bit of diagram around kind of the conference setups, and I think hopefully this is fairly clear now from what I've been saying. But so first of all, just to illustrate, so our youth club conference structure in Caledonia, there would be a Caledonia Midlands conference and a Caledonia North conference for clubs that are part of the whole club conference. So effectively, that's clubs who use our old terminology in Tier 1 to Tier 3. There would then also be a Caledonia Midlands and a Caledonia North fixtures conference for the clubs that were part of the use our old terminology Tier 4 programme, who don't have teams at every single age group. The same would apply for the West Conference terms of the same sort of makeup. And for the East Club Conference, there would be that Borders, which was the old Warrior Conference, which again we would form part of that. So for the Blue conferences, after your phase 1 of playing your conference fixtures, you would progress either to a National Cup, if you were to qualify for the National Cup for your 16s and 18s, or a Regional Cup competition for that second phase. And then for the Green conferences, you would progress from phase 1 into phase 2, the second phase being the Regional Cup competition. And then for the schools conference, same logic applies here. It's just a slightly different makeup, just due to the number of schools that we have. So a Caledonia conference would be split out, so by Conference A and a Conference B. The West Schools Conference, our old L200, for those schools would be Conference A and a Conference B. There would then also be another West Schools programme. So for those who are here in the Barbarian Conference for our West Schools, that would apply. And then again, similarly for the East Schools, the same logic would apply there, with the different conferences within the East. I should say for both the schools and the clubs, we have tried to keep them as similar as we possibly can from what it was supposed to be. So in most cases, the conference that you were due to be in, you will still be in that similar conference makeup. Again, similarly to the previous slide, for the Blue conference, schools do progress to a cup for the under 18s, under 16s if they were to progress and qualify, or regional participation fixtures. And then for the Green school conferences, you progress to a second phase to a national shield or regional and participation fixtures. And then finally, just to reference for the schools, we're absolutely not forgetting about Tier 4 state schools. We understand the importance that from a participation point of view that our Tier 4 state school programme has for participation of rugby within Scottish Rugby. So it's absolutely on the agenda. These will be programmes that will be supported by the regional teams as they have been previously. But as you could probably understand, there's just a wee bit more information and guidance that we need from Sport Scotland and Scottish Government to be able to formulate some more detailed plans for Tier 4 state school regional programmes. But that will progress and evolve as we progress further through the roadmap. So just to give you a potential example of a season progression, just to, I suppose, put the last few slides into life of how it could look. So we take Caledonia conferences as an example. So we'd have our Caledonia Midlands Conference A and a Caledonia North Conference B, and they would be playing their conference fixtures. At the end of that first phase, our top two under 18s and our top two under 16s from each of those conferences would progress into the National Cup quarterfinals, and that would then form a traditional cup format. For every other team and every other club out of all those four conferences that haven't progressed, would be part of the Regional Cups programme for under 15s, 16s and 18s. And again, the specific format of that is still to be confirmed, but there will be that Regional Cup for all the others, all the other clubs and teams that don't play within that, and that will be replicated across the regions. And there'll be similarities, and there'll be a framework for that. And then, as I said, teams who are in the 16s and 18s Cup quarterfinals who get knocked out would drop down into that programme just to provide them with more consistency of scheduled games supported by Scottish Rugby. So just a bit of a scenario, I suppose, there. Okay, so we're at 40 minutes. I've obviously done a lot of talking. I hope that was nice and clear for you. I will reiterate again, the slides will follow, and I'll just talk through some next steps where there will be more detail, because obviously what I've shared with you there is quite headline, it's quite high level, and there's a bit more work to do to get that detail within there, which I'll just touch on now. So in terms of next steps, first of all, there are a really good number of questions coming in, so thanks for sending in your questions. I haven't had a chance to look at them yet, but as I say, we will be able to download these questions when we finish the webinar, and we will look to respond to these questions over the next few days. And if there are enough sort of relevant questions for all, we may produce an FAQ document and send that out, but that'll be dependent on the types of questions that have come in. Throughout the month of August, that's that second circle, we will start to take this framework that we've got and then develop the actual conference grouping. So putting our clubs and schools into the conferences and then developing fixture schedules for this season structure that we've proposed here. And if I jump right to the end, the blue circle at the end, we'll be looking to communicate that, so the season structure, which would include the conference groupings, the fixture schedule, and the competition rules at the end of August, which should hopefully give a minimum of 2 months before we would start the season, which would hopefully give you enough time within your clubs and schools to plan, prepare, inform your other coaches, and then start to develop that. So that's what that's looking like. Just to draw to your attention, the green circle, there's a lot of alignment happening between the boys game and the girls game, really because the challenges, the considerations that we're having to make, the principles that are helping drive and inform our decisions are very similar, as they are with the adults game for the male and the female. So there is a separate piece of work going on for the girls' season structure for next year. I'm aware there's also been a separate sense check group, and there was also some of you may have been involved in webinars that happened back in April, where we consulted with each region on season structure for next year. So all point I want to make here is I want to draw to your attention, this might not be you, it might be somebody else within your club or school, but there will be a girls' season structure webinar similar to this next Tuesday, the 11th of August, which will be hosted by Rudy. And I say that will form a similar process. So we will send out communication over the next couple of days via email, directly to contacts and directly to clubs. But I just want to draw this attention so you can either look out for the email yourselves and attend, or go back to your club or school to pass on that message, and hopefully we get a good attendance for that. And then some final messages from me. So you're probably all aware that the Rugby Development Department is still operating with fairly limited staff. We want to encourage you to keep sending in questions and inquiries. So please do continue to do that, and I really do mean that. If you can, direct them to your regional director or rugby development admin at sru.org.uk in the first instance. Then it will go to the appropriate person and the answer will get dealt with more efficiently that way. So if you can, please continue to engage with us. But if you could do it through those two channels, that would be much appreciated. I just want to remind you of the COVID-19 e-learning course that we launched a couple of weeks ago. And this is for all players, coaches and match officials and volunteers within our game. I think we've already had 4,500 individuals complete the course, which is absolutely fantastic, and a real testament to how everybody's really buying into this, and the commitment that everybody's showing to return to rugby and return to rugby safely. So I just want to remind you that that's there. Again, the link will be on the slide when I send it out. It can also be found on the Scottish Rugby Return to Rugby web page as well. And if you haven't yet done it, I would encourage you to complete that. I think it takes about 15 minutes, so it's not terribly onerous, and is quite good and informative. And then finally, just to recognise, and this is on behalf of us all at Scottish Rugby. We understand that these are challenging times. We're potentially asking you as volunteers within clubs and schools to go the extra mile, and you're all doing that from what we're hearing and seeing around social media. We also understand that we're having to change things from what we previously released back in March, and that's just because we've got stuff that's completely out with our control. But it's just to say that we really, really do appreciate your continued commitment, your dedication to getting rugby back safely, and your understanding and maybe sometimes patience with us. So that is really, really appreciated. And then that goes hand in hand with tonight as well. We've had a really, really good number dial in tonight, and again, really appreciate the time that you're giving up to listen to me for 45 minutes. So thank you for that. And that is all we have. So that's me finished for tonight. I look forward to engaging with you in some way or fashion over the next few while. And please continue to stay safe, and all the best for when the season comes round. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.